All right, so here I am. I'm glad that we're starting this message series. Just wanted to let you know, starting this message series, we're experimenting. We're running an experiment during this series. We're actually live streaming this message to our satellite location, like all the way across the world to Durant Avenue. Right. So I just wanted to give a little. Hopefully, they're timed so that they're now done with their praise and all of that. So just wanted to give a little shout out to Durant Avenue location. Woo! Yeah? All right. Okay, good. Okay, now that we just had an illusion of interaction, so we'll begin. So today, we'll be talking about being stuck in addictive behaviors. The intro video that we just saw, it ended with this question, right? So how can we get unstuck? That's the important question, That's the interesting question. How can we get unstuck? And right off the bat, I can tell you this, that I'm not going to be here. I'm not going to stand here and tell you some easy pat solution, like have more willpower, or just don't do it. Just decide. You need to decide to stop. Well, if it was that easy, we would never have bad habits, right? We wouldn't be struggling with bad habits. We would just be able to stop all our bad habits on a dime. We would never feel like, why did I do that again? Or why did I waste so much time on that again, even though my GPA is telling me stop? We would not feel such sentiments if it was that easy. But we do. The fact is that we do feel these sentiments. We kick ourselves in just, throughout the day or throughout our weeks, and we actually have that experience. It's not so easy to get unstuck. So what we're hoping to gain from today is not some silver bullet solution. We're hoping to gain some awareness and some understanding and maybe some doable small steps that we can take toward eventually getting unstuck. So this addictive behavior, this word addictive or addiction, is actually a pretty heavy word. And we don't want to label ourselves with that word very, very often. Most people actually have a very hard time admitting that this describes their behavior, because when we think of the word addiction, what's the picture in our minds? Is some guy shooting up drugs in a smoky alleyway, and you're like, oh, that's not me. I'm not in that situation. So we say, I don't think this describes me. But another word for this addictive behavior, actually, I already alluded to it, but it's bad habits, right? Bad habits. These habits can range from heavier things like substance abuse or eating disorder or sexual addiction like pornography, or to some lighter things like binging on media or gaming, and just stuff that leave you saying, oh man, I really didn't want to do that, but why did I do that again? So I guess there have always been defenders of media and entertainment, of course. They're defenders of freedom of expression. And they say stuff like, well, if you don't like it, then just don't watch it. If something that you see offends you, then just turn it off. What's the big deal? It's your choice, just turn it off. Is it really that simple, though? Is it really that simple? Is it really simple to just turn it off like that? Well, I think actually these days, I think we've become more aware, right? Even with the lighter addictions, we've become more aware that tech companies hire brilliant psychologists to make their apps addictive by providing dopamine hits and things like that. And we now know, wow, I have a hard time putting stuff down. Actually, I just found out this week that 61% of Americans feel that they're addicted to the internet. Kind of interesting, 68% of women feel that way, whereas 50% of guys feel that way, even though behaviorally, guys are more addicted. So I think there's a denial going on there. So, I'm going to do an anonymous poll here, actually. So, Durant location, you guys can actually interact with this as well. Right? So I'm trying to put in some pretty interesting interactions. So the question that I want you to consider is what are some addictive behaviors that have plagued you in the past or present, or is continuing to plague you? Okay, so think about some words in that, and I want you to actually, okay, take out your phone. Take out your phone during a message, right? And either go to pollev.com if you have internet access and data access right now. Then go ahead and go to pollev.com, and then the code is GracePoint. Or if you don't have data access, you don't have browser, then go ahead and go to text GracePoint, the word GracePoint, to number 37607, and then afterwards it'll give you a confirmation, and then you can type in your answer. So basically, the answer is just list of words that you feel like were some addictive behaviors that have plagued you in the past or present. Okay, so I'm gonna give you a few more seconds to keep doing it. I mean, just are you guys there? Yeah, is okay. Yeah, does it work? Oh, you guys are still going into it. Okay. It says it's full. Oh, I thought I upgraded. Oh, shoot. Okay. That's only 40 people then. Okay, so this is what it looks like, I guess. This is the collection. Oh, okay. 40 people is a max for a free version. But I upgraded this week, so anyway, we'll fix that next week. But okay, 40 is a pretty good sample size for the student T distribution. So, okay, so there it is, right? Drugs, media is a big one. Social media, I would imagine. YouTube seems to be a pretty big one. Pornography, gaming, eating, consuming. Yeah, there's some substance, there's porn. Yeah, so we're aware. We're aware. We have these behaviors that we would really like to get rid of, right? But somehow we find ourselves going back to them again and again. And it's not some neutral thing that sits there inert. These are not neutral things. They destroy our self-esteem. They increase our insecurity. And more of your emotional energy gets taken up by this, actually. It's devoted to trying to somehow manage it or trying to keep it a secret from others. And we seem to have lost control over our own behaviors. I guess you can kind of think of it this way. Let's imagine this box here is that addictive behavior. And here you are, here you are. And you're the one who chose to do that. So you're carrying the box. You're like, okay, I chose to pick it up. So you're saying, I can drop it if I want to. I'm the one who carried it. I'm the one who picked it up, so I can drop it. But what happens after a repeated time of carrying, or maybe not even after that many times? What happens is something comes out of the box, Something comes out of the box. And it's kind of a scary picture, but right? Oh my. I hope. So it's like this, right? It comes out and takes a hold of you. It grips you. It takes a life of its own. It has a momentum of its own, and it seems to now control you. Like you thought you were holding it. And then that behavior starts to now control you and control your schedule. Control who you hang out with, like when and where. And man, we have this experience. The Bible puts it this way. Romans 7 says, "For I do not understand my own actions, for I do not do what I want, but I do the very thing I hate." What's wrong with this writer of Romans? Like, he's the Apostle Paul. What's wrong with that? Why would he not do what he wants to do, and why would he do the thing he hates doing? Like, if you hate doing it, then don't do it. If you like doing it, then do it, right? Well, is this person just an abnormal, weird person? No. This sentiment I mean, it's a common experience, right? First half, it says, I do not do what I want. Oh man, no kidding. That's so true. I want to exercise, guys, and get in shape. I want to exercise and be able to do more than 2 pull-ups. I really want to. I even pay for it. You even pay for it, like 24-hour fitness, annual, like that, the 24-hour fitness fee, membership fee. Actually, I had this deal that I was grandfathered into, which the cost for me, after that initial 5 years of like commitment that I had, or 3 years of commitment, long time ago, maybe actually more than 20 years ago. After that, the deal was every year after that, it's $49 for the entire year. That's an awesome deal, right? And now, as long as you don't let it lapse, though, if you let it lapse, if you have to pay it every January. If you let it lapse, then that $49 deal is off. So every January, I have to recommit myself, because last year I didn't go. But then you're like, oh, but this year I'm going to go regularly. I'm going to make it, that's what I'm going to do. And then eventually, after like 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th year, my goal became something like, this year, I want to go for 24 hours total per year. That's my goal, 24 hours. This is 24-hour fitness. But I couldn't even do that. It became like 6-hour fitness, for the year. I'm like, oh my gosh, that was pathetic. And the lowest point for me was when I decided that I would suddenly go. I go, okay, I'm going to go. And then I haven't gone for like, I don't know how long. And then I realized, oh my gosh, I forgot to pay the fee this year. So I called them and like, oh no, that $49 deal, I forgot to pay. And then they're on the other side, they're like, oh, sorry, yeah, you can't let it lapse. Now you got to pay the full price of like $500 a year or something like $400. And then I'm like, oh, really? And then as this person's talking to me, I hear him clicking. Basically, he's looking at my record, okay? Click, click, click. He goes, okay. And he goes, you know what? I'm going to let you have the $49 deal again. That guy realized this guy doesn't come. It's basically free money for 24 hours. He's just paying us year after year after year. And he was right, Whew, that was a low point. But, 3 years ago, actually, I finally said, you know what? I'm not going to continue this foolishness, this self-deception. I realized I do not do what I want. I became at peace with that. I said, okay, I'm going to let it lapse. I'm done, so that's what happened. I mean, hey, Durant location. Ask Steve Saw. He's still paying for that. All right, so he recommits himself every year. So that's good, I guess. All right. Now, but when it comes to something like exercise, maybe the issue is something like laziness. And I just can't get our bodies to move, But it's more than that, right? Because when it comes to stuff that I don't want to do, things that I hate doing, things that really I despise, when it comes to those things, then suddenly our bodies move fine. Then suddenly you end up doing those things. You don't want to stay up all night before the midterm, binging on some show, right? You don't want to do that. Or clicking on that one more link, or clicking on that link that leads to an explicit website, that because you know what the aftermath is going to be, and they're just like this continual addictive cycle. In our sane moments, we do not want to do that. We actually hate doing that. We certainly maybe hate ourselves for doing that, right? But we end up doing it. Man, indeed, I do not understand my own actions. I do not understand my own actions. And this is not just talking about just a one-time mistake, Verse 19 of the same chapter says, for I do not do the good I want, but the evil I do not want is what I keep on doing. I keep on doing it. This is the description of addictive behavior. The Bible's word for it is actually enslavement to sin. Enslavement to sin. verse 23 says, "But I see in my members," this is talking about members of the body, right, of my body, my physical body. "I see in my members another law waging war against the law of my mind and making me captive to the law of sin that dwells in my members." You're a captive to sin. You're enslaved to sin. This is the very strange quandary that we find ourselves in. We choose to commit sin. We choose to pick up that box. No one made you do it, but yet we find ourselves captive to it. We find ourselves captive to sin. As Ravi Zacharias said, sin will take you farther than you want to go, keep you longer than you want to stay, and cost you more than you want to pay. You know, that's true. I mean, what's the solution though? 1 John chapter 1 actually kind of starts us on the right path. It says, "If we say that we have no sin, we deceive ourselves, and the truth is not in us. If we confess our sins, He is faithful and just to forgive us our sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness." So it seems to kind of talk about, if we say so, that would be maybe part one, you know. It tells us, don't deny it. Don't deny. So that's one. And then instead, confess. Instead, admit it. Right? So that's really the beginning point. Don't deny it, but admit it, to confess. This would be actually, you know, the beginning point of stepping out of denial and admit the problem. Step out of the denial that this is actually a problem and admit it, that we have a problem. And this is why when you look at something like 12-step programs, like Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous or things like that, which are actually, I don't know if you know about 12-step programs. 12-step programs are based on biblical principles. It was actually a Christian program that because of its success, the secular world has tried to adopt, but then it still contains things like pray to God, pray to a higher power. They would actually replace it. But, you know, this is step one. Actually, step one out of the 12-step program is step out of denial and admit the problem. But this step one, just because it's step one doesn't mean it's easy. Actually, it's much harder than it seems. You know, because our natural response is to deny. That's our natural response. We turn a blind eye to it. We don't think about it. Or we might even know that we have this habit, but we deny its grip on our lives. We deny the power of the grip on our lives. We say things like, "Oh, I have that, yeah, but it's not a serious problem. It doesn't really control me that much. I could stop any time if I wanted to, if I just put my mind to it. So I'm not really addicted to this." And the way that we deny, I think it can become more subtle and more sophisticated. We might even say something like this: "Oh, yeah, I recognize that used to be a problem before, but I'm pretty good now. I'm okay now." And I'll tell you why this is a sophisticated way of denying. It's like this diagram, you know. I had a problem in the past, so I had a problem, but I'm good now. So here's now, right here. Oh, this doesn't show, but here's now on the right side. And then that red band is the time in which you relapsed or you did that behavior, that addictive behavior. So I've been good for a while, but then there was that time in the past where I was kind of struggling. So you would acknowledge that. But then, well, how long was this good period? What's the time frame here? And it turns out we're talking about 3 months. You know? Oh, it's been 3 months of sobriety. Oh, it's been 2 months of eating normally, you know, instead of binging and purging. It's been 1 month of not viewing porn. So I think that's now in the past, we say. You know, it's just in the past. But if we were to just zoom out and get a bigger time frame, what we see is, it turns out those 3 months of sobriety, you know, is just a part of an overall pattern. In fact, I think we kind of know that this pattern will continue over and over again. We pretty much know that the next break, next chance where you have a whole week of, I don't know, when you're kind of alone and things like that, you're going to relapse. It's predictable. It's predictable. So that's a sign that we're captivated by sin, that we're enslaved to it, that we have an addictive behavior problem. That we're going to, again, hit ourselves on the head and goes, why did I do that? But by narrowing the time frame and just looking at what happened in the last month or something like that, we've denied that this is a problem, and then thus we've ended up denying ourselves our pathway to healing. This is why this is step 1 in the 12-step program, right? And even though it's step 1, it's the most difficult step. It's the most repeated step, actually. That's why in like AA meetings, they keep on practicing this every meeting. They sit down, go, hi, my name is blank, and I'm an alcoholic. And they go, hi, Daniel, They have that kind of a conversation every meeting. They practice that. There's a saying, denial feeds addictions. In fact, addictions thrive and can only survive under denial. That's how addictions grow. Now, it's more complicated than simply telling somebody. The denial isn't, like I said, right? Even if somebody says, yeah, I have a problem, they have to keep on practicing it. The very fact that you have developed a bad habit, it means that you denied that it was a problem for a while, right? For a while you've been denying it. It means that you've become very proficient at it. You've been denying it to others as well as maybe you're denying it to yourself. That's how the bad habit developed, right? So we need to really stop denying, and we need to admit that. But that's hard. I know it's difficult. But that will be the very first step toward healing and redemption and ultimately hope. So actually at this time, I wanted to invite up Rachel O, to give a short testimony about how she stepped out of denial about a particular thing. So, all right. Let's give a round of applause to Rachel.
Hello? Is it working? Hi. You guys can hear me? Okay. I struggled with media addiction. How I struggled with this involves getting honest and admitting that I had a problem. So exactly what he said. But this actually wasn't hard to do at the beginning, since it had been an ongoing thing that often interfered with my school and academic performance. One story that shows this is when Dead Week rolled around my sophomore year. I felt the creeping stress of all the work and studying that I had to catch up on that week. I was taking 3 technical classes that semester: Math 53, Chem 4A, Physics 7A, if you guys know. However, I used the excuse that there was so much time during Dead Week, a full week, that I escaped the looming stress by binging on media, catching up on shows and movies that I hadn't gotten to that semester instead of on all the work that I hadn't done. And by the end of that week, I felt depressed, angry with life and myself for the self-sabotage I had engaged in, and I felt defeated. I ended up failing 2 out of the 4 classes I took that semester. The hard part of struggling with media addiction was actually moving toward people and structures that I would need to actually be able to stop and fight this addiction. I had to actively fill my time and replace times that I would watch or even be tempted to watch media with alternative habits and things to do and people to keep me accountable. I had to accept restraints and limits on myself, like an accountability app that I downloaded on my devices that would report to someone when and for how long I would be spending on media. I also had to become more aware of what would trigger me to turn to those things, like loneliness, boredom, fatigue, disappointment, and stress, and set new patterns so I didn't turn to media when I felt those things. Over time, what was also hard to keep doing was to admit when I fell again to the same addiction. Fighting the sense of shame and guilt that I fell again, disappointing myself and others, that I was still that kind of addicted person was hard. There were more times where I gave into the temptation to just overlook my times of failure as one-time mistakes, and to beat myself up to try harder to get over this myself. But changing my perspective to see that I had an ongoing problem, that my heart is prone to addiction, and that I probably would always need to be vigilant over how my heart will keep trying to go back to this addiction, was helpful for me to let go of the sense that I should be quote-unquote over this by now, and just to open up to help and accountability. What changed my perspective to see that what I have is an ongoing problem not just a temporary problem that was going to be solved by a one-time realization, was to see that I wasn't just addicted to media, which meant I could get unaddicted, but to see that I was an addict. From Pastor Daniel's talk on addiction, I learned that patterns and paths in the brain that the addiction cycle or ritual forms again and again are exponentially harder to undo. And this helped me to see that I don't just have a behavior I need to correct, but a set way of being that I would need to work on possibly for the rest of my life. This seems small, but it changed how I viewed myself. In the same way that a recovering alcoholic would probably have to avoid settings with alcohol for the rest of their life, I was a recovering mediaholic that would always have that pattern and desire in my brain that I would need to be aware of. I started to see myself also as someone who couldn't be trusted with media because my heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. Jeremiah 17:9. Over time, I also experienced it getting easier to avoid turning to media and have even experienced a decrease in my desire and longing for it. What had once been something I lived for and couldn't see myself living without, I now had a more properly sized view of it as unnecessary or extra entertainment and can see and have experienced life, real life, without it. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Rachel. Yeah, so she talked about how, there's some concrete actions as well, but the attempt to step out of denial again and again, not just once, but to kind of admit it again, like, oh wow, this is kind of a repeated pattern. That is difficult. Sometimes it's like the last thing that you want to do. Why would it be so difficult? I think the most obvious answer is, of course, our gigantic pride. But also there's another more subtle reason. I think we find it so difficult to step out of denial and admit this problem because, in a way, we actually want to protect it because it serves us well. Our bad habits and addictive behaviors, they actually do something for us. What does it do for us? It helps us, it serves us well to escape the real world. There are many aspects of the real world, the reality that we don't like, especially different anxieties that we feel. Maybe it comes from a persistent sense of inadequacy or social anxiety for sure, a lack of confidence regarding life, fear of the future, fear of the finals, that looming thing that is coming at you. I mean, it's sort of weird to put a score on like our subjective experiences, but I imagine, let's just for a moment imagine that you can score it, okay? So let's imagine this. Here's the real world, okay? And this is your feeling, your subjective like self-assessment about yourself, how you feel in this real world, being needed. Well, on a scale of 1 to 10, let's say, you feel like a 3, like I'm hardly ever needed. Social skills, maybe 7, or it's like 4, or power or control, 4. Life skills, 3, confidence. So life sucks. The real world stinks. So you escape. You escape to the fantasy world. Especially regarding like media addiction or gaming or pornography. In that world, your scores are off the charts. Or at least it makes us momentarily forget about the real world. So the whole thing, the real world sort of kind of gets blanked out. It gets blurred. And you escape reality. People can use food this way, where you eat not because you're hungry, but as a way of escape. Or to achieve some strange sense of control. People can obviously use media and binge watching this way. But eventually, you have to return to the real world. Eventually, you got to turn off that screen, although nowadays, I guess your screen is constantly on in your pocket. Eventually, you got to look up from the screen. And then what you find is the real world again. The real world is still there. And not only that, as you spend more and more time in the fantasy world, what happens in the real world is, the very stuff that caused you to feel insecure, over time, they become worse. They become worse. Therefore, the fantasy world becomes even more attractive. You know, the addictive behavior therefore becomes even more attractive, and then so you escape to that again. You escape to it again. Now you've completed the feedback loop. The feedback loop is a microphone. It's like, you know what a feedback is? It's where the microphone picks up what the speaker is producing, and it keeps on amplifying. So the sound guys, can you give me a little feedback so that okay, so like that. You know what I'm saying? And you let it. If they didn't stop it, it would keep on getting louder and louder and louder, and something would break. You know, so that's the feedback loop, and this is the addiction cycle. You know, maybe you've experienced this already, right? Eventually, you end up going to the fantasy world, not because you enjoy it, but because you really don't like the real world. So it almost feels like a fix. You just need to fix it. Something's broken. Well, people say, well, I can see that something like pornography will sort of mess with you, but there's nothing wrong with enjoying harmless entertainment once in a while, a little bit, right? Yeah, that was harmless. Except, many times, it doesn't just stay little, right? It starts to take over. Almost every moment of your free time, and your unfree time, like your homework time, gets taken up with the fantasy world. And you spend more and more time there. And also, the tragic thing is, you end up missing out on your chance to actually make the real world more attractive. You don't get the chance to work on the things that makes you insecure, right? To make the real world better. That's really particularly tragic because all good things happen in the real world. I think that's a very important truth that we need to be convinced of. Let's say this together. Ready, set, go. All good things happen in the real world. Yeah. Are you convinced of that? All good things happen in the real world. It's not what happens on TV shows. You know, the fact that Avengers won in the end, that's not a good thing that happened to you. Okay? All good things, real good things happen in the real world. Friendships, love, the thrill of experiencing genuine forgiveness, the character-forming experience of going through thick and thin together with someone. They all happen in the real world. So what can we do? You know, just resist the temptation? Well, it's not that easy, you know. Just confessing and admitting it, well, that's an important start. Confessing it before Jesus, that's an extremely important thing because that gives us access to forgiveness and justification and hope. But that doesn't mean that we can suddenly be freed from the addictive behavior, though, right? So it doesn't mean, well, sometimes, though, it does. I know that for some people, it does happen miraculously. I know that for some of you here, actually, when you became a Christian, when you repented in that major repentance, you experienced this miraculous change from being freed from your addictions, and that's a miracle, right? So it does happen, but most of the time, for the rest of humanity, the healing is going to be a process. I think this memorable framework can be helpful, though. It's this idea of the rat cage. Okay, and in this rat cage, I'm going to show you. I brought this as a stage prop. Pretty cool. This is a rat trap, but this is the same thing, same idea. Okay, so here is a cage, and you put a rat in there, and they gave it 2 bottles, right? And it's an experiment. One bottle had just regular water, and the other bottle had morphine solution. And guess what happened? This is what happened, right? So rats basically would keep on drinking the morphine water, and they would soon overdose themselves, and 100% of the rats would basically kill themselves. Okay? So people thought, well, obviously, yeah, morphine is addictive. Addiction is in the substance itself. But then, Bruce Alexander, a Canadian psychology professor, came along, and he reran that experiment, except he made changes to the cage. Right? And instead of this barren cage where the rat is sitting there kind of like being experimented on, he put the rats into a large place, large area, like 200 times the area of this cage, and with other rats with playground and balls to play with, but still had the water and the morphine drink. So it was more like a rat park, you know? So And in this new environment, the rats actually didn't get hooked on morphine water. They drank regular water. Maybe rats are smarter than humans. I don't know what's going on, right? What is going on? The astonishing result was that mortality rate went from 100% to almost 0%. What changed? The cage changed. The environment changed. The rats went from the environment of isolation to an environment of community. Right? So the lesson was that we need strength from outside. Right? The strength to resist the temptation, strength to resist that addictive behavior cannot be from within. It doesn't, like, you sitting in your room trying to like resist, that's not going to happen. Right? So basically, let this be a remember, we need to get out of this. You need to get out of this kind of situation and get into community. And the tragic irony is that when people feel stuck in sin or stuck in some behavior, addiction, when they feel the grip of addiction, instead of going toward community, guess what most people do? They go exactly in the opposite direction. They go back into the cage. People go back in here. They go, oh no, I feel addicted. Okay, I'm going to go in here and try to handle it. That's exactly the wrong thing to do. They isolate themselves even more. 1 Corinthians chapter 10 tells us something about our ability to withstand temptation. It says, no temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability. But with the temptation, he will also provide the way of escape, that you may be able to endure it. You know, in English, you don't get the plural form of you, right? You just get the you. But actually, the scholars note, this you here is plural. It's y'all, you know? So here's a commentator commenting on it. The yous in the text are both in the plural, meaning that the experience of the testing and the efforts at handling it are never presumed by Paul to be borne by an individual alone. Paul's assumption is that any testing you experience is never in isolation, and the bearing of the test, the handling of it, is never supposed by Paul to be done by an isolated individual. Others will always be bearing it with the person who is tested. So the text supposes that God will not test us beyond what all of us can bear together. Paul's outlook stands in sharp contrast with the modern tendency to privatize and individualize all religious matters and experiences. Yeah, so stop staying in the rat cage to deal with your addictive behaviors and sins. You know, God made us as communal creatures. We're not meant to live alone, and we're not meant to deal with our problems alone. You know? So as the band comes up, just want to conclude. And we're going to be also passing out a little card. So if you can help with that. So Durant, Loft, also, if you haven't passed out the card, by now go ahead and pass out the cards at this time. And I just wanted to recap with this exercise of the card, but so these are the two things, right, that we need to get started on to get unstuck. Step out of denial and admit the problem, and then number 2, get into a rat park, which is community. Get yourself out of the cage and get into a rat park, which is the church. God has already provided for us. And it's so tragic. It's like a mouse dying in a barn full of food. I mean, and then by going back into the cage. It's really, really tragic, but get into the rat park. So even though, you know, these are starting points, I know that it actually takes courage. And so you all received a card you guys are getting passed out, you know. So it's a card with 1 John 1:9 written on it, and which reminds us that on the other side of confession, there is forgiveness and cleansing and hope. So it's for you to keep, okay? So we will not be collecting this. So go ahead and just think about that, and let's just take a minute to think about the message. And if you want to, you can write a prayer on the other side of the card. Maybe just a prayer of saying, okay, help me, I have to recognize and admit this is a problem. Or maybe you can write the name of someone that you would like to talk to this week, as you take your steps out of the rat cage into community. Okay, so let's have that time right now.